Marin Katusa's new book, The Colder War, is now on bookshelves. Marin pulls away the curtain on how Russia, China, and Iran have come to dominate the global energy stage and put the petrodollar to rest once and for all. Find out why Dr. Ron Paul and critics alike are calling The Colder War one of the most important books you will read this year. Visit PalisadeRadio.com and enter our weekly drawing to win a free signed copy of Marin's book. That's PalisadeRadio.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of Palisade Radio. This is your host, Colin Cattell. Before we get started on our interview, I'd like to announce the winner of this week's free book giveaway. We're giving away a free signed copy of Marin Katusa's New York Times best-selling book, The Colder War, and this week we'll be sending a book to Anthony from San Francisco. Thanks, Anthony, and everyone else for signing up, and remember to visit PalisadeRadio.com to enter to win your free copy. Now on the line with me today is a brilliant entrepreneur, Nolan Watson. He's the CEO of Sandstorm Gold. Nolan, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
In 2005, you became the first employee of Silver Wheaton, quickly advancing to the position of CFO and ultimately playing an instrumental role in positioning Silver Wheaton as the largest silver producer in the world. Nolan, can you start by defining what is a streaming company for our listeners and then identify what makes a streaming company such an attractive investment?
Absolutely. So a streaming company, fairly similar to a royalty company, but the difference between a royalty, which it really is revenue from the top line, a percentage of that revenue going to the royalty company, the difference between that and a stream. With a stream, the streaming company is effectively paying upfront on day one an amount of money to help a mining company, usually to go build a mine. Sometimes they use the money to pay off debt or do other things with it, buy other mines. But that payment is made upfront on day one by the streaming company, and what they really get in return is a contract that allows them to purchase a certain percentage of the mine's production for the entire life of the mine. And what you're getting when you do that is a fixed price per unit. So at Silver Wheaton, most of those contracts were struck at $3.90 per ounce of silver, and when the silver price goes up, for decades to come, you're buying silver at $3.90 per ounce, and you're selling it at the spot price, whatever that happens to be, and your free cash flow is basically the difference between those two prices. And one of the benefits of doing that is that you reduce the risk that you would get if you invested in the equity of the underlying mining company. So, for example, if their capital expenditure overruns, the streaming company is not as exposed to those because they don't have to pay for those overruns as long as the mine eventually ends up getting there. If their operating cost overruns, which we've seen over the last 10 years, and if operating costs are higher than you expect, Silver Wheaton still bought that silver at $3.90 per ounce, and now at Sandstorm, we're a gold streaming company, and we buy gold on average at about $400 an ounce. So it's a lot of protection that's built in that isn't built into the underlying equity of the companies.
And just for our listeners to know, you stepped away from your duties at Silver Wheaton to start Sandstorm Gold in 2008, and you raised hundreds of millions of dollars in a very weak market. On a personal level, why did you make the leap to start your own company? Is it perhaps that you felt the accomplishment of becoming the biggest silver company in the world took away from the challenge of your job?
Well, I think you have to understand the psychology of someone who is willing to go be the first employee is something I'm the type of person who likes an exciting challenge and likes to build something, and once it's built, I'm content moving on. And I did exactly that. Started up Sandstorm with a couple $100,000 in the bank and a shell company and an idea, and went for it, and have built a fairly good diversified streaming and royalty company.
What can you tell our listeners about Sandstorm Gold in particular, and on a wider scale, the nature of the streaming business in this market?
Yeah, so in Sandstorm, invested all around the world. We now have 46 streams and royalties. 14 of those are on assets that are currently in production. So if you think broadly of what Sandstorm is and the assets that it has, we're cash flowing, even at these low gold prices, we're still cash flowing around $30 million of free cash flow per year. We have $90 million of cash in the bank. We have absolutely no debt. So in these depressed markets, we're perfectly positioned to be able to grow the company, continue to diversify the asset base, and continue to increase our cash flow per share. And so that's a high-level view of Sandstorm. We've managed our balance sheet very, very well, understanding that our business is countercyclical and that we get to buy things when they're cheap, and that time is now. And so that is Sandstorm, and that's the business that we're in, is buying things when they're cheap and making money off them when the prices eventually rise, which I believe they will.
As you mentioned, we're in the midst of a very poor market, and it seems to me that the greatest speculators embrace the bad market conditions because it is those very market conditions that allow for spectacular gains. As an investor, what can be done right now to fully realize the upcoming bull market in gold stocks? Because most investors are suffering at least some type of a loss at this point.
Yeah, now's a very important time to get an investing strategy right. And whether you're an executive investing corporate capital or whether you're just a personal investor investing your own capital, there's a lot of risk out there still. And so right now, the equity capital markets in the mining industry are broken. And what that means is there are hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 or more, mining companies that need to raise money and that cannot do it today. And the risk as an investor is if you invest in one of those companies today, the minute that equity starts coming back into the market, they're going to issue millions and millions of shares and massively dilute your position. And so when your thesis eventually comes to fruition, which is eventually the gold price will rise, and you expect to get this massive rise in the share price of the underlying equity or stream or whatever you've invested in, if you've invested in the equity, you don't get that same rise if they massively dilute you as soon as they can raise equity. And conversely, if this market continues to be very bad for a prolonged period of time, what's going to happen is a lot of these companies are just going to go insolvent and they're going to cease to exist and you'll lose all of your money along the way. So it's very, very important to invest in ways that if and when the thesis of higher gold prices does come true, that you will benefit, which means you need to invest in unlevered companies that are not going to go insolvent, and you need to invest in companies that do not need to raise equity. And so Sandstorm, being a streaming company, we are poised to profit off of rising gold prices, and we do not need to raise equity, and we have no desire to do so. So companies like Sandstorm, I think, are a safe bet, but there are also other companies out there in the industry that don't have debt, that have depressed valuations. They'll be able to ride it out and don't need to immediately raise equity. But you have to pick carefully because those companies are few and far between.
Nolan, as a streaming company, how do you protect Sandstorm Gold from a larger streaming company coming along and trying to acquire you at such a low price?
That's a great question. Candidly, it's very hard to do that. In markets these days, if you don't have a protection mechanism, i.e. a large shareholder who is just going to vote no matter what the price is, then you are susceptible to being taken over in a hostile manner. Fortunately, Sandstorm doesn't have any shareholder over 6%, which is actually also a good thing when you're trying to protect against takeovers, because one move that a lot of companies like to make is they find one shareholder who has 20% is willing to sell to the highest bidder. They buy that block first and negotiate that, and then they basically have a stranglehold on you and force you to sell the company to them. And so we don't have any one shareholder that meets that criteria, and so I think we'll be harder to take over because of that, but we are absolutely susceptible to those types of things.
Okay, you're very passionate about streaming, clearly, and I want to talk to you a bit about passion. A lot of younger people think that there's a magical being called passion, but they lack an understanding of what it really is. And if you think about passion, it's driven by success. So if you spend the same amount of time as your peers learning finance, but find yourself excelling against that group, a passion can be born. So what I want to ask you is, when did you find the passion to build the biggest and best streaming companies in the world? And does going to work every day and getting better and better and better at what you do drive more passion into your work?
Well, I think the more passionate you are about something and the longer you do it, the better you get at it, and the better you are at something, the more enjoyable it happens to be. I found in my life, passion actually is, for me, moved out of a place of purpose, which is if you can understand and identify the underlying purpose of what you're trying to do and why, then you become particularly passionate about it. And I would say that I believe that commodities are an important thing that this world needs, and I'm particularly passionate about the purpose of gold and the role that I think that it has to play in society going forward. And I believe that what we're doing is an important thing and that we can make money for shareholders doing it. And so that's what I wake up every day trying to do.
You recently participated in an interview with CEO.ca, with much of the interview focused around advice for young people who want to acquire wealth. And at one point you stated that the beginning one's career with the main goal of becoming rich is effectively equivalent to saying life has no purpose other than to serve oneself, and their ultimate goal is to increase their stature and consumption of meaningless things. I think that's a very good point you make. One could also make a compelling argument that many of the greatest philanthropists and entrepreneurs, maybe including yourself, started their career with the goal of becoming rich, realizing that wealth is an effective way to implement one's ideas. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I'm certainly in favor of people who have a purpose in their life and have a meaning behind what they do and want to make a difference with their life. Those people being successful and acquiring wealth, I think, is a wonderful thing. I'm very, very supportive of people who have those purposes becoming rich, and will do whatever I can to help them along the way. And certainly, I myself have been successful at and have acquired wealth in my life, and I will continue to endeavor at that because I want to be able to redeploy that capital in ways that I find meaningful. So I have absolutely nothing against people wanting to become rich for the right reasons. I guess my issue is I think there are a lot of people that think still to this day, despite the fact that it's a cliche, that a lot of people think money will make them happy, and it doesn't. And living a life to serve yourself and just buy fancy things because you think it's cool and it'll help your stature, I don't think that's a meaningful endeavor in life. And so I'm a big believer in living a purposeful life, and to the extent that wealth can help you do it, I think that's great.
I'm really fascinated with people's views on philanthropy, and I've talked to some other people in the mining space about it. For example, Rick Rules openly said that while he questions whether philanthropy on a large scale is beneficial, he still does it because it makes him feel good. Doug Casey is pretty far in the extreme against philanthropy in general. I know you're the founder of Nation's Cry, which is a nonprofit organization. Where do you stand on the spectrum of philanthropy between, say, Steve Jobs, who thought that his time and money was better spent to help the world by investing in his technologies and growing wealth, and Bill Gates, who's kind of gone to the other extreme and said, let me give it all away before I die?
Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom actually in each of those viewpoints. And I think a holistic view is one where we all understand that there is a lot of need in the world that needs to be addressed, and that as people who care about humanity, we as people want to actually make a difference and to help that. And I think that that's a good thing. I think that the way people go about it is often misguided and leads to repercussions that were unintended. One of the big mottos of the charitable organization that I'm involved with is a Rockefeller quote, basically about that charity is injurious if it does not help the recipients of the charity to become independent of it. And so I think that the goal of all philanthropic endeavors should be to solve fundamental underlying issues so that the charity is no longer required. It should be working yourself out of a job. And I think that the vast majority of charities that we see out there are doing the exact opposite. They're just sort of sustaining life, and they think that feeding children indefinitely is a worthy endeavor. And I'm not trying to say anything against that. There's certainly hungry kids in the world, but the problem is if that's all you do, you're not actually solving a problem, and you might actually exacerbate it in the long run because you're teaching dependence. And so I'm a big believer in philanthropy. I think that people owe it to give back to the world. That's my personal belief anyway. We'll always continue to do it. I just think people need to do it in an intelligent, logical, sustainable manner that addresses the underlying fundamental problems.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective on it. As we finish up here, I just want to shift over back to the metals a little bit and get your thoughts on where in this cyclical bear market we are in terms of the price of gold. I know nobody has a crystal ball, but you're on the inside. You get to talk to a lot of influential people. Are we nearing a bottom? Have we hit a bottom? Do you have any idea how long this is going to last?
I absolutely do believe we are nearing a bottom. I believe that if you're an investor and you have capital, then now is the time to, if not be making investments, to at least be getting very smart on which stable investments that you do want to make. I find that prices tend to overcorrect in the mining industry, and they go further to the downside than most people anticipate when they go down, and further to the upside when they're going up than most people anticipate. So it would not surprise me to see another leg down in the gold price temporarily as a spike down, but I believe that we are already fundamentally below a price that makes economic sense to continue mining gold. And I think the world is going to continue to need gold going forward, and gold's going to be an important part of our monetary system and society going forward. And so the price will go higher, I believe, and I think it'll do it sooner rather than later.
This interview is not going to air for another few days, but we're recording on Monday, December 1st, and today is potentially a very interesting day for gold. In the past 24 hours, we've fluctuated between around $11.30 an ounce, and right now we're up to $12.20. Do you see any significance to that, or is it just another volatile day near the bottom?
Well, I think there's a little bit of significance to it in the sense that whenever you're at the bottom of a market or close to the bottom of a market, news that you would expect would be negative, for example, Switzerland voting no on their gold referendum, people immediately start selling something down, and then they realize, wait a second, it's still fundamentally undervalued, and the price rallies. And so there are a lot of other issues going on in the world right now, particularly related to oil and geopolitical issues, and a lot of things affecting the price of gold. But I do believe it is a sign that you're close to a bottom when there is bad news related to gold and the price goes up. That's a very good sign.
Okay, very good, Nolan. On that note, thanks so much for the insights today, and I hope to get you back here soon.
Thank you.
Vladimir Putin is a self-made man. He did not come from money. He did not come from a royal family. He was your blue-collar boy who did well. Putin has positioned himself in the center of the chessboard in the energy matrix of the world. Right now, Putin and his allies in China, India, Brazil, all of the emerging markets are aligning together to fight the European Union, the IMF, and America. Eventually, the rest of the world will realize that Obama and America are hiding behind this curtain with no powers anymore. Putin specifically has positioned Russia to become a global superpower, and America has never been more vulnerable than it is today.